Okay, so we're getting started here with League of Women Voters, San Luis Obispo County's lunch with the League for this week. Give us a little bit to get our tech recordings and streamings available, and we'll get going. This week we're going to be talking about misinformation, election myths busted. So I'll go ahead and say hi for myself. So my name is Laura Albers, and I am not Julie Rodewald, which you are all used to seeing now at this point every Monday. I am a member with the League, and I help out with elections as well. So Julie was not able to be with us this week, and she asked if I could sub in, and I said yes, and I'm so excited to sub in with this because I get to interview Tommy Gong, and I have known Tommy for a while. We first met many years ago when Tommy went through Leadership San Luis Obispo, and he was class 16, Sweet 16, and that was back when I was the executive director of the program. So I've known Tommy for a while. That was back when he was working with Julie. And Julie was still county clerk recorder, and so he knows Julie really well. And then since then, I've been able to run into Tommy every election season, at least for the last few years, when I've been, I take a day off work to serve as to work in the precinct. So that's been really great. So welcome, Tommy, and I would love to go ahead and introduce you now. If you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe how long you've been in the county and how long you've been working with the county clerk recorder's office, that would be great.
Oh, great. Yeah, I was raised in the Central Valley of California in the Modesto area. And I actually took a job as an elections manager in Stanislaus County in 2003. And a few years later, then I had the opportunity to become Julie's assistant clerk recorder in 2005. And upon Julie's retirement in 2014, then I ran for the office and was elected as the county clerk recorder. And now I'm in my second term.
Awesome. And so county clerk recorder is an elected office. That is something that you run for. Is it every 4 years, Tommy?
Yes, exactly. Not this year, though.
Fortunately, you don't have to worry about that. I'm sure it's probably very difficult to be running a campaign and dealing with an election like this at the same time. Yes. Near impossible. Great. Well, thank you. We're really fortunate and appreciative to have you here with us today. You are the expert in all things elections, and specifically to San Luis Obispo County. So today we are going to be focusing on misinformation. And real quick, I just want to go over, I'm going to share my screen for a second here, and then we'll pop back out. So we are going to look at, okay, Lunch with the League. Just to remind you all, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. We have been engaging in a campaign that we call Register, Learn, and Vote. So we are very active across our county and across the country in helping people to register to vote, learn about what's on their ballot and how to vote, and then getting people to vote. And that's part of what we are doing here every Monday at noon with these webinars. General housekeeping, if you have questions for us today, if you can put them in the Q&A, we won't address them immediately. We do have a couple questions we're going to get through, but we will go to them throughout the conversation. We'll break and we'll address any Q&A that comes in there. Sessions are being recorded. So if you can't watch all of this, no worries. It will be available on our website, the League of Women Voters SLO website, on our YouTube page, and also we'll have that live Facebook recording on the Facebook page. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing now, and we can jump right into this. So Tommy, before we get to questions on misinformation, it might be good for us to start out with you just explaining a little bit about what's different this year. I know last week Julie was able to share a little bit about the vote by mail process. And she had talked about some of the things, about where the ballot locations will be and that type of thing. But if you could just give us a little snapshot from your perspective, what's different this year?
Yes, thank you. Certainly because of the coronavirus, there's been a multitude of changes in store for this election. They come from the Governor Newsom's executive orders, one of which is that every voter will automatically receive a ballot in the mail. That's something that certainly not every voter is used to. We're probably sending out an additional 40,000 ballots to voters who had never voted by mail before. And so we're certainly providing all the additional information for those voters. The second piece being is that instead of your traditional polling places, the governor and the Secretary of State's office took into consideration the large number of cancellations of poll workers that were taking place in other states during their primaries after California's primary was taking place, was already conducted. A lot of poll workers were very concerned. Of course, many of our poll workers are in that vulnerable age group, so they were starting to cancel out, which was really causing a big strain on the remaining polling places that states could have. And so that's where we saw the long lines. So taking that into consideration, the governor called for what we call as voter service centers. That's what we're calling it. We're going to have 23 of them compared to 74 polling places is what we would typically have. So 23 voter service centers that will be open for 4 days of voting. And that's going to start on Halloween on October 31st, beginning that Saturday, Sunday, Monday between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then, of course, on Election Day, the same number of locations will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If a voter should go there, they're going to really notice quite a different operation than what we would typically have in a polling place. Certainly, they're going to notice all the distancing that's taking place right now. In fact, we opened up our 2 offices, both in San Luis Obispo and Atascadero, beginning today for early voting. And so there you'll see all of the voting booths that are really spaced apart. The check-in process involves computers that log into our voter registration system. We issue ballots through a ballot on demand printer. So we're kind of a paperless operation until we execute the job for the precinct that voters are voting in. Back to vote by mail voting, because that's where we're really anticipating the highest level of participation, and really what we consider to be the safest way of voting for the vast majority of voters is to cast that ballot in the mail and to read up on the issues and to vote that ballot in the leisure of their own homes and then return it. They can return it in multiple ways. They can return it by mail, and it's already including prepaid postage. They can return it at one of our 19 drop boxes located throughout the county. Those are in the voting instructions. Or they can return it to one of the 23 voter service centers during the 4 days of voting. So there's a multitude of ways for voters to be able to return, and we encourage them to do so, even to the point where I included the I voted sticker in the instructions. So voters don't have to have that reason to drop it off in person to get that I voted sticker. We're including it in the instructions in their ballot packets to begin with. And so certainly we've taken a lot of effort since the summer. This process is for counties that have done this type of process, switching over to this type of election model is usually an 18-month process. We're cramming it all in 6 months to pull this all off. And we are making a lot of success. There are certainly things that we're working on to be ready for those 4 days of voting, but already ballots were out as of last Tuesday. And in the mail stream, ballots were being delivered on Wednesday. The post office was already receiving ballots, voted ballots immediately. The next day, they were being dropped off at some of our library locations. And now I can attest that we have trays and trays of voted ballots picked up from the post office, and we'll be processing those for the signature checking process. So that's pretty much the true information for what's in store for our election. And as kind of a 50,000-foot view, that's what's taking place for this election. Already early voting is open, and of course November 3rd is our final election day.
Awesome, that's great. And we'll hit some of these questions. Before we do, I just want to point out, I know we already had a comment about the I voted sticker. I was going to tell you, I have heard so many people over the last week celebrate the fact that they got their I voted sticker in the mail. So that might be everybody's favorite part about this election. quite frankly, right?
If
I know I
only
used to always
knew.
go in person to get that sticker
Yeah,
too.
if I only
So
knew, right? I keep joking about it, but here we're actually seeing it in action.
it's awesome. It's awesome. So, okay. So we had a couple questions. We'll get to some that come up in the chat too. So I want to start with this. There's a misinformation. People think, oh, I missed the October 19th deadline to register. We say that that's a deadline to register. So I must not be able to vote now.
Right. No, there are provisions for voters to be able, who missed the deadline, to still be able to participate in the election. This is called conditional voter registration, and it's available, at these 23 voter service centers, as well as our office, if someone should miss that deadline. Essentially, they have to vote a provisional ballot, but given that they didn't vote anywhere else and eligible to vote, then those ballots will be counted. And so, yes, there is always, and that was a fairly recent law. I think it's maybe about 6 years old. And so it's really enfranchising more and more voters who might have missed that deadline in the past.
Okay, so that's great. So October 19th is a deadline to register, but you can also just vote provisionally if you're registering after that.
Yeah, and other places they call it same day registration, so voters can certainly come in and even or let's say they recently moved to the county, for example, after the close of registration, then they would be able to register here by filling out the provisional envelope, and we'll have all the pertinent information given that they fill the envelope out completely. Then we'll be able to give them the ballot for the contest that they're entitled to vote on, and so basically they'll be a full-fledged voter for the election.
Okay, great. So then the next myth that is in alignment with that is people think that provisional ballots are not counted, or they're only counted if there's a close race.
Yeah, you do hear that one from time to time. So I can attest that, and my staff can attest, that every single provisional ballot is processed, no matter what the spread on the race is early on, being like, let's say right after election day. We go through each and every one of them, and each and every one of them are adjudicated. The vast majority are counted. And there's a ways for voters to be able to find out about that too. I was just checking our voter status page. Now, this is a page that the Secretary of State has for looking up your voter status. On our website, on our election page, there is a place where you can check your voter status. And what you can do there is you can, this system is linked up to our voter registration system. And that's what's happened more recently, is that all 58 counties are now linked up, voter registration rolls. So for instance, if someone moves from Santa Barbara into San Luis Obispo County and they register here to vote, then given that they were registered at Santa Barbara beforehand, then they would receive that information almost instantaneously to cancel their registration in Santa Barbara County. At the same time, this is a place to look up to see if they voted vote by mail, that they can be rest assured that their ballot was counted, or provisionally, that if they voted provisionally or did a conditional voter registration, that they can check their status for that particular election to see how their ballot was adjudicated. So there's a lot of tools available for voters, more information available to voters than ever before. But rest assured, we process every provisional ballot. And like I say, my staff can attest to that since we're all doing it.
And as somebody who has worked before in your elections office as an assistant processing those, I will agree, yes.
And you see the trays and trays of pink envelopes that we have to process after they're all turned in after election night, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so one of the other questions we had, we already answered then, and that was that a myth is that there's no way to know if my vote by mail ballot or my provisional ballot has been accepted. So we just talked about that. There is, you can log in and track your ballot. and
Yes,
find
or
out
even,
whether or not that's been counted.
yes, or even a phone call to our office, we can inform the voter that way too. But there are many tools for them to look it up themselves.
Okay, and so then, you know, I think that leads to another thing that I know people are worried about, and you just addressed this a little bit. You know, if you've moved, let's say, and you want to vote here, but you weren't registered here yet, and so you're going to do conditional registration. You're going to vote maybe that day, you know, day of, or during that 4-day period, you're going to show up. Hey, I was registered somewhere. So how do people know if, let's say, they were already sent a ballot to their old address and they don't have that anymore, maybe? How do we know that that person didn't already vote on that ballot and then will vote a second time with this ballot?
Yes, that's a good question. So again, back to all of the equipment and technology that we're deploying at the Voter Service Center. Actually, we're using that right now when we're checking in voters at our office starting today, is that it will show the status of, because given that everyone's sent a vote by mail ballot, then naturally everyone's, you know, should show a record showing their vote by mail ballot being issued. Given that the ballot is not voted or not returned to us, then we're able to void that ballot at the same time that we're able to check them in to vote early voting here, for example, or during those 4 days of voting. So it's instantaneous information that's being provided to us. It's constantly being updated. It also bounces off against the statewide voter registration database. So for instance, if there is a person who, trying to think a scenario here, they voted or that they were issued a ballot from another county and then they moved into our county, that we would be able to see that a ballot was issued to them, but it was not returned. And so would be able for them to vote a regular ballot. If it shows as being returned, you know, our last recourse is to have them vote provisionally, and that we handle that, we adjudicate that during the canvass. So there's a lot of checks and balances that are in place when someone comes to our Voter Service Center for us to make the proper determination and to avoid anyone from voting twice.
Great, thank you. Okay, next myth. Election night results are final.
Not anymore, are they?
Certainly not this year, right?
So here's a way to think about it. We sent out, we just eclipsed 181,000 registered voters this morning. And so I'm very happy to say we're just continually growing our voter registration list of voters because they're, you know, and we're adding new voters, which is really exciting. You know, it's not just re-registrations.
Right.
So it's a great thing. But given that everyone is sent a ballot, and projections are counties that have done this type of model, 95% of the voters who vote are going to be doing it by mail. So I've been doing some projections on this, and given that we might eclipse our voter turnout, we had 83% in the past, but let's say it was 85% turnout and 95% of those voters ended up voting by mail, then I'm looking at 150,000 vote by mail ballots. Now, it depends on how quickly they come back to us, the voted ballots are returned to us. They're appearing to come back to us a little earlier than normal, but they could still be quite a quantity that are turned in late in the game, like the week before. So certainly my plan is all the ballots that we'll receive through the Saturday before the election, we will get them processed and counted, and that at 8 p.m. on election night, those will be the results for the vote by mail ballots. The ballots that are being cast in early voting here in San Luis Obispo and in our Atascadero office, I plan to get those counted in our 8 p.m. count. And that the ballots that are cast into the 23 voter service centers during the first 4 days of voting, those will be counted shortly after 8 p.m. For the first 3 days. And then of course, as the ballots are coming to us from election night, then we'll get those counted as well. But I could have a lot more vote by mail ballots turned in at the voter service centers or in the mail. By the way, according to Governor Newsom's executive orders, vote by mail ballots, as long as they're postmarked by election day and are received by us 17 days after the election. So it used to be 3 days after the election, but now it's 17 days after election, just to be sure that we receive all the qualified ballots, in particular, those that are coming from overseas, because the mail service from other countries are also being challenged as well in terms of how effective their delivery times are. So that gives these voters more time to be counted. And so it still does hang in the balance depending on how many eligible ballots there are still to be counted. I'm aiming to getting the vast majority of the vote by mail ballots counted by November 10th. And so that's a full week after to get those updates out. Then we're on to the provisional ballots of how, depending on how many provisional ballots we have, it might take another week or so, or maybe up to 2 weeks after that to getting those all done and to complete our canvas. So that's kind of a bird's eye view of what happens after Election Day.
Okay, great. Now, last week, Julie talked a little bit about, filling out your vote by mail ballot and the envelopes and how to address that and all of that. Question right now, though, there's another myth. A myth is that, hey, if I leave something blank on my ballot, none of my votes are going to count.
No, that's not correct. So we do get questions from voters too, like they'll say, I don't know how to vote on the state propositions because the way it's written, I'm just not sure what I'm supposed to, how I want to vote on that. And we let the voters know, look, you can leave that contest blank, and it will not, we'll count all of the contests where you did place a mark in them. And so it'll be just partially counted basically, but every contest that the voter marks their choice in, those will be counted. And so, yeah, it doesn't nullify the entire ballot in that case. And in many cases, we inform voters, like for instance, if they made a mistake on their ballot, that we give them instructions on how to, that instead of us reissuing them a brand new ballot, and it might take days to do so, that if we can identify how the voter made their mark, what their voter intent is. Like for instance, if they filled in one oval incorrectly, but they wanted to vote for another candidate, they just put an X through it and then fill in for the candidate. And then we're going to look for the entire ballot for the voter intent. Given that all the other ovals are just filled in, then we're going to count that one contest where the oval is filled out, and where the X, we're going to nullify that vote. We instruct voters on that when they call us, that's a way to be able to fix that ballot and get that to us. And then, they don't have to worry about receiving a replacement ballot.
Great. So that was my follow-up question. So you already handled that. That's great. I'm gonna pop over to some of the questions that are coming in through our chat as we finish up our time together here. So what if somebody makes a mistake on the envelope? So maybe they signed it in a way, they left out their middle initial, they usually use a middle initial or something. Should they cross it out? Do they put white out on it? What do they do if they make a mistake on their envelope?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, whiteout is not recommended and highly, we don't want to gunk up the envelope scanner, which can happen when you have a lot of whiteout or other type of material on it. So certainly, in fact, I had a voter come in today who was dropping off actually a couple, and it happened that one spouse signed the other's envelope and they didn't know what to do. So certainly I just instructed them to, cross out the name of the spouse who incorrectly signed and just sign within the box or somewhere near the box, because the envelope scanner will do a full scan of the envelope. And so therefore we'll be able to see the signature that's, in or near the box to be able to do the signature comparison on. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. This envelope is very simple in terms of, it has their pre-printed address on it. This is just a blank envelope. But all they really need to do is sign in the red box. And I always say, we have a short motto now: stop before you drop, meaning stop and make sure the ballot is signed, sealed before being delivered. So signed, sealed, delivered. Okay, got to remember Stevie Wonder's song in the 70s, and that will get us to be able to do the right thing when we're making sure that we sign our vote by mail ballot.
Great. Thank you. Quick question. Can voters get ballots in Spanish or other languages?
Yes, so we are not printed ballots. This is our first foray into it. We're not a bilingual county where we have to have printed Spanish ballots. But what I've done for this election is we have, should a voter come to our voter service center, we have our accessible ballot marking devices. We have to have 3 of them at each location. And we program a Spanish ballot into the system. So now when somebody checks in and we can give them actually they can make the selection English or Spanish. And then given that they select Spanish, then the ballot will appear in Spanish language and it will be recited in Spanish if they use the audio headphones, for example. Also new to this election is what is called remote accessible vote by mail. So this is a way for voters, it was designed originally for voters who have disabilities and they want to be able to vote by mail confidentially and independently. So a remote accessible vote by mail system gives them access through a web portal. We email them an access code that will allow them to be able to vote that ballot from home using their own devices that they have at home, given that they have a computer, internet access, and a printer to be able to print the ballot once they make all of their choices. So that system looks just like our accessible ballot marking equipment at the polls or at the voter service centers. And so because we have Spanish at the voter service center, we also have it in the remote accessible vote by mail system. So a voter will just call us and make that request, and then an email will be sent to them so that they can get access to that system and then be able to select Spanish, and then they can navigate through that system.
Okay, great. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question, and then if there's questions that we haven't answered, we'll do a follow-up and we'll post it maybe, with the link when we're posting this on our Facebook and other places, because I know a lot of people have questions. So just kind of one of these big things is on voter fraud. And you talked about how, when we process any ballots we receive, they're being checked against the state database. Has this person been registered or cast a ballot anywhere else? What about when people are out of state? Or so what if they just move from, Kansas, right? How do we know that they didn't also cast a ballot in Kansas?
Yeah, I mean, there are some checks and balances where we're going to send a notification to, the various jurisdictions out of state about, them registering. And so typically what would happen is the state's going to look up the voter participation for that voter, and they may get back to us if that voter had already voted in that event. It's not as streamlined as with the 58 counties being all connected now. We're not connected from state to state to state. So that's the one thing that, actually in the way of the future, maybe we could get to that point. But right now it's still kind of on paper for a voter to say, hey, we just want to be sure that, this voter who we received a notification from did not already vote in that other state. So yeah, there's some checks and balances on that. Is not as streamlined as what we have within the state, but there are some ways that we can prevent that from happening.
And voter fraud is a felony, correct? So if somebody was caught voting twice, that is a felony.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, okay. And then just follow up on that then, as far as, registering voters, right? So how do you know that there isn't somebody who's registering people in their home who either aren't eligible or aren't really there or whatnot? How does that registration, how do you prove that somebody actually can be a registered voter?
Yeah, that's a good question. When we input a person's voter registration, the system is looking for matching information for a voter to verify from like a third party source that they do live at this address. For instance, it bounces off against the DMV, the driver's license, and it's going to look to see if name, date of birth, and address seems to be matching. And if not, then what will happen, it will look at the Social Security Administration and look for the last 4 of the Social Security number to see if there's a match. Given that there isn't, then that's where we have what is called a first-time federal voter. These are voters who there's no corroborating information to state whether they're verified as a voter or not. So these are voters who are required to show ID. In fact, it'll show when they're checking in for the voter to provide ID in that event. It doesn't happen a lot. I'm going to say it's probably 0.5% of the voters, if even that much. When I did my vote by mail file, we might have had about 150 voters out of the 179,000 ballots that we sent out that will include an insert for the voter to please provide a copy of their driver's license so that we can validate in that case. And then after that, then they're done. After they voted their first federal election, then it isn't required anymore. Great. So there are, certainly checks and balances in place with the voter registration piece. Also, I'll just say that, my staff has on hand as we're doing the voter registration, actually inputting them. We're looking, we're just going to be kind of cognizant of all of a sudden we see, voter after voter after voter being registered at the same address, and that raises a red light, and then we would check into that type of scenario.
Okay, great. Tommy, there are a lot more questions, and I know people could probably keep you on all day long. Unfortunately, our time is out. I wanted to quickly answer one. A Cal Poly student said that they have their parent sending them their ballot from, they're still registered in another county, and just asked about dropping it off though. And so I just want to confirm with you that any of those ballots from other counties can be dropped off at any of our locations.
Yes, you're correct about that. That was a fairly recent law. And so a voter can drop off if they just happen to be out of the county when, when election day comes around, and that's the last that it can be, then they can drop off at any elections office or polling place or vote center, for example, in another county, and then they will forward them to us. In fact, it's required by law. I think it's over 5 days that they have to get them to us. And then we would say, as long as they're timely received by the county that they dropped it off to, that they're timely, they were timely cast, and we would be able to count that ballot.
Okay, fantastic. So I am just going to show this information right here. So what I tell people all the time, Tommy, because people do have a lot of questions and there is misinformation, even if they've watched this and they've had a lot of these misinformation ideas busted today, there's still a lot of questions that come up. And so I tell people all the time, if you want true factual information, contact the county election staff. And in this county, that's you, the county clerk recorder. And they can go onto the website, slowvote.com. They can call the number that we have here on the screen. They can stop by the county clerk recorder's office, but that you guys really are there to help provide any answers to any questions anybody has about voting.
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So that's it for today. Please, you guys, make sure you're registered, make sure you're voting. If you have any questions about voting or how to ask, Tommy is available. I know from personal experience, all of his staff are remarkable. They're so well informed. They're so kind. They're so considerate. No question is too dumb. Really, truly, they address all questions with just a great amount of care and honor for the work that they do there in the elections office. So I'm very appreciative of all the work that you do in your office there. And we are so grateful for you spending the time with us today.
Great.
So thank you, Tommy. For everybody else, we will try to wrap up some of these questions that didn't get answered in some chats when we post it after the completion of this. Tommy, thank you.
Great. I appreciate the time. Anytime I can get more information out to voters, the better off we are as a community.
Awesome. Okay, thanks all. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.